In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, the Moonlight Bakery's golden almond tarts hide a deadly secret. When Eliza Hawthorne, its spirited owner, collapses with a bitter scent of cyanide on her breath, Miss Jane Marple senses murder behind the cozy façade. A cryptic letter, a silver hairpin, a tainted spoon, each clue points to greed, betrayal, and a shadowy Londoner pulling strings. Was it the debt-ridden nephew, the secretive accountant, or the glamorous delivery girl? As Miss Marple unravels a web of lies, a shocking twist reveals the killer used Eliza's own caution against her, who poisoned the heart of the village. And what will they do when cornered? Chapter 1. The scent of almonds in the gentle folds of St. Mary Mead, where the lanes curved like the lines of a well-loved book. The Moonlight Bakery stood as a quiet monument to tradition, its stone façade weathered by decades of rain and sun glowed softly under the autumn dusk, the windows casting amber light onto the cobbled street. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting aroma of baking bread, sugared pastries, and a faint, nutty promise of almond tarts, for which the bakery was renowned. The village, with its thatched cottages and orderly gardens, seemed to orbit this humble establishment, where gossip was as much a currency as the warm loaves handed over the counter. Miss Jane Marple, a slight figure in a tweed skirt and lavender cardigan, walked past the bakery that evening, her steps measured, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly spinster, perhaps on her way to the vicarage for tea. But those who knew her hand few truly did understood that Miss Marple missed nothing. Her mind, sharp as the needles she wielded, was already cataloguing the village's latest currents. The butcher's new apprentice, the vicar's oddly timed visit to Upper Mead, and, most intriguingly, the faint discord emanating from the Moonlight Bakery. The bakery's owner, Mrs. Eliza Hawthorne, was a woman of formidable presence. At 55, she carried herself with the vigor of youth, her auburn hair streaked with silver and pinned into a practical bun. Her almond tarts, a recipe handed down from her grandmother, were the pride of St. Mary Mead, and the upcoming harvest festival was to be their grand showcase. Eliza had spent weeks perfecting the batch, her kitchen a whirlwind of flour and fervor. Yet, beneath her brisk efficiency, Miss Marple had sensed a shadow of unease in Eliza's manner, of later tightness in her smile, a fleeting glance toward the door as if expecting an unwelcome visitor. That evening, as the church clock chimed 8, Miss Marple sat in the vicarage, her knitting needles clicking in rhythm with the conversation. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, was recounting the latest parish squabble over the flour rota when a scream shattered the calm. It was a sound that cut through the cozy hum of the vicarage, sharp and raw, like a blade through silk. Miss Marple's needles paused, her head tilting slightly, as if the scream had carried a message only she could decipher. Mrs. Clement gasped, her teacup clattering against its saucer, but Miss Marple was already rising, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. "Trouble," she murmured, more to herself than to the startled Mrs. Clement. "At the bakery, I suspect." The vicarage was a short walk from the Moonlight Bakery, and Miss Marple moved with surprising swiftness for a woman of her years. The village was stirring now, drawn by the scream like moths to a flame. By the time she reached the bakery, a small crowd had gathered, their faces a mix of curiosity and dread. The door stood ajar, the bell above it silent, as if unwilling to announce the calamity within. Inside, chaos reigned. Eliza Hawthorne lay sprawled behind the counter, her apron askew, her face a ghastly shade of white. Beside her, on the polished wooden floor, was a half-eaten almond tart, its golden crust crumbling at the edges. The air held a peculiar scent, the warm, nutty fragrance of the tarts, but something sharper, more acrid, like bitter almonds left too long in the sun. Miss Marple's nose twitched, her mind racing back to a long-ago conversation with a chemist in London, who had described the telltale odor of cyanide. Dr. Haydock, the village physician, pushed through the crowd, his medical bag in hand, a portly man with a nonsense air. He knelt beside Eliza, his fingers searching for a pulse that was not there. After a moment, he looked up, his expression grim. "She's gone," he said, his voice low. "Poison, I'd wager. Cyanide, by the smell." Of it, the crowd gasped, whispers rippling like wind through wheat. Miss Marple, standing near the counter, observed the scene with quiet intensity. Her eyes flicked from Eliza's lifeless form to the tart, then to the faces around her. Clara, the bakery's young apprentice, stood frozen, her flour-dusted hands trembling. Sophie, the delivery girl, hovered near the door, her glamorous poise marred by a flicker of fear. Mr. Grayson, the accountant, lingered in the shadows, his face unreadable behind his wire-rimmed glasses, and Leonard Hawthorne, Eliza's nephew, was conspicuously absent. Inspector Crane, the local constable, arrived shortly after, his uniform slightly rumpled, his enthusiasm undimmed by his limited experience. A man in his 30s, with a penchant for quick conclusions, he surveyed the scene with a frown. "Tragic accident," he declared, scribbling in his notebook. "Must have been something in the ingredients. We'll have the tart tested, of course, but these things happen." Miss Marple's lips pursed, a faint line of disapproval. She had seen accidents, and this was no accident. The tart, she noted, was not one of the display batch, which sat untouched on a tray. It had been taken from elsewhere, perhaps the kitchen, perhaps prepared specially, and the vial of cyanide, wherever it was, had not wandered into the bakery on its own. Someone had brought it, someone with intent. She stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. "Inspector, might I suggest a closer look at the kitchen?" Eliza was meticulous about her ingredients. "An accident seems unlikely." Crane blinked, momentarily thrown by the intervention of this elderly woman. But he knew Miss Marple's reputation, her quiet knack for unraveling mysteries that baffled others. "Very well," he said grudgingly. "Let's have a look." The kitchen was a marvel of order, its counters gleaming, its shelves lined with jars of sugar, flour, and spices. Eliza's recipe book lay open on a wooden stand, its pages filled with her precise handwriting. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on a small, empty vial tucked behind a sack of flour, its label reading almond extract. Clara, trailing behind, gasped. "That was full this morning," she whispered. "I swear it was." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the implications. Cyanide could be disguised in such a vial, its bitter scent mistaken for almond extract by an unsuspecting baker. But Eliza was not unsuspecting. She was cautious, shrewd, a woman who had built her business through sheer will. Why, then, had she eaten the tart? And who had placed the poison within her reach? The crowd outside grew restless, their whispers turning to speculation. Miss Marple overheard snatches of conversation. Leonard's debts, Eliza's refusal to sell the bakery, a stranger seen lurking near the village green. She filed each detail away, her mind a tapestry of threads waiting to be woven together. The bakery, she sensed, was more than a place of pastry sit, was a stage for secrets. and Eliza's death was merely the opening act as Inspector Crane cordoned off the kitchen. Miss Marple slipped away, her shawl drawn tight against the evening chill. She thought of Eliza, vibrant and stubborn, a woman who had poured her heart into her tarts. She thought of the village, with its quiet facade and hidden currents. And she thought of the scent of almonds, sharp and deadly, lingering in the air. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple lit a fire and settled into her armchair, her knitting in her lap. The needles resumed their rhythm, a soft counterpoint to her thoughts. She recalled a similar case years ago, in a neighboring villager grocer, poisoned by a jar of tainted jam, the culprit, a jealous rival. People, she mused, were much the same everywhere. Greed, envy, love, they left their marks, as surely as footprints in the snow. The Moonlight Bakery, she knew, held the key to Eliza's death. Its staff, its patrons, its very walls whispered of motives and means. Clara, with her nervous hands and quiet loyalty, had she seen more than she admitted. Sophie, with her charm and secrets, was she merely a bystander, or something more? And Leonard, the absent nephew, where had he been when the scream rang out? Miss Marple's needles clicked, each stitch a step closer to the truth. The village slept, but Miss Marple did not. Her mind was awake, turning over the puzzle of the bakery. The harvest festival was 2 days away, and the murderer, she was certain, was still among them, hiding behind a mask of grief or innocence. She would watch, and she would listen, and she would unravel the mystery. As she always did. The scent of almonds, she thought, was a warning, and Miss Jane Marple was not one to ignore a warning. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storms. The morning after Eliza Hawthorne's death dawned grey and heavy, as if the sky itself mourned the loss of St. Mary Mead's most spirited baker. Mist clung to the hedgerows, softening the outlines of the villages. Thatched roofs and stone walls. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her breakfast table with a pot of tea and a slice of toast, gazed out her window toward the high street. The Moonlight Bakery, shuttered and silent, stood like a sentinel of secrets, its usual warmth replaced by an eerie stillness. Her knitting lay folded on the sideboard, but her mind was far from idle, piecing together the fragments of the previous evening's tragedy. The village was abuzz with speculation, as villagers are wont to do when death disrupts their quiet rhythms. Miss Marple, with her unassuming presence and keen ear, had already gathered snippets of gossip from her maid, Lily, who had a knack for collecting the villagers' whispers. Lily reported that Mrs. Bantry, from the manor house, had declared it a dreadful accident, while the postmistress, Miss Weatherby, hinted at darker motives, muttering about Eliza's refusal to sell her bakery to outsiders. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her lips pursed. Accidents, she knew, were often convenient explanations for those who preferred not to look too closely. She decided to visit the bakery, ostensibly to offer condolences to the staff, but in truth to observe. Slipping on her sturdy shoes and a woolen coat, she made her way down the lane, her steps deliberate, her eyes scanning the village for any telltale signs of unease. The high street was quieter than usual, the usual bustle of morning shoppers subdued. A few villagers lingered near the bakery, their heads bent in hushed conversation, their glances darting toward the darkened windows. Inside, the air was stale, the counters bare save for a few crumbs from yesterday's chaos. Clara, the young apprentice, was sweeping the floor, her movements mechanical, her eyes red-rimmed. Sophie, the delivery girl, stood near the door, adjusting her scarf with a nervous flick of her wrist. Mr. Grayson, the accountant, sat at a small table in the corner, his ledger open but untouched, his face a mask of grim concentration. Miss Marple noted their positions, their expressions, the way Clara avoided Sophie's gaze, and the way Grayson's fingers twitched as if itching to close the ledger and flee. "Good morning," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but clear, like a bell in the fog. "I was so very sorry to hear about dear Eliza. Such a loss to the village." Clara looked up, her broom pausing mid-sweep. "Thank you, Miss Marple," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's all so sudden." Sophie offered a tight smile, her eyes darting to the door. "Awful, isn't it? Poor Mrs. Hawthorne. She was so kind to me." Mr. Grayson said nothing, merely nodding, his spectacles catching the dim light. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on him for a moment, noting the faint sheen of perspiration on his brow despite the cool morning. She made a mental note to inquire further into his role at the bakery. Accountants, she had found, often knew more than they let on. Their ledgers a map of hidden truths. Inspector Crane arrived shortly after, his boots sloughed against the wooden floor. He carried an air of authority that seemed to strain against his limited experience, his notebook already open to a fresh page. "Miss Marple," he said, with a nod that was half respectful, half wary. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I thought I might offer some comfort," she replied, her tone mild, "and perhaps assist in my small way." Eliza was a friend, after all. Crane grunted, turning his attention to the staff. "Right then. Let's go over your statements again. Clara, you were in the kitchen all evening." Clara nodded, her hands twisting around the broom handle. "Yes, sir. I was helping Mrs. Hawthorne with the tarts for the festival. She was particular about them, wanted them perfect. And you, Sophie." Crane's pen hovered over his notebook. "I was out on deliveries," Sophie said, her voice smooth but her eyes guarded. "Got back just before it happened. I didn't see anything, Inspector." Grayson cleared his throat. "I was in the office, balancing the books. I heard the scream and came out to find, well, you know." Miss Marple listened, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes moving from one face to another. Their stories were tidy, almost too tidy, like a tablecloth smoothed to hide stains beneath. She thought of Eliza, who had been no fool. A woman like that did not die by chance, not with a vial of cyanide so conveniently misplaced. And where was Leonard, Eliza's nephew, who stood to inherit the bakery and its not inconsiderable profits? As if summoned by her thoughts, Leonard Hawthorne appeared at the door, his coat rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. He was a young man of 25, with his aunt's auburn hair but none of her vigor. His shoulders slumped, and his hands fidgeted in his pockets, betraying a restlessness that Miss Marple found telling. "Inspector," he said, his voice hoarse, "I heard about Aunt Eliza. I was at the Red Lion last night. I didn't know until this morning." Crane's eyes narrowed. "The Red Lion, eh? Can anyone vouch for that?" "Tommy Pierce was with me," Leonard said quickly. "We were playing cards. Ask him." Miss Marple's lips twitched. Tommy Pierce was a known rogue, a young man whose word was as reliable as a cracked teacup. She recalled seeing him loitering near the bakery a week ago, his eyes sharp with calculation. Leonard's alibi, she suspected, was as flimsy as the pastry dough Eliza had kneaded so expertly. "Leonard," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but piercing, "you must be terribly shaken. I saw you speaking with Eliza only yesterday, near the village green. You seemed quite animated. Leonard flushed, his hands stilling in his pockets. "We were just talking about the bakery," he muttered. "She wanted to expand, maybe. Open a tea room. I thought it was a bad idea, that's all." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle sympathy, but her mind was racing. She had seen the argument, brief but heated, and noted the way Eliza's hands had clenched, her voice sharp with defiance. Leonard had stormed off, his face dark with frustration. Was it merely a disagreement over business, or something deeper? The bakery, she knew, was more than a livelihood to Eliza. It was her legacy, her pride, and Leonard, with his debts and restless ambition, had reason to resent her control. Inspector Crane, oblivious to the undercurrents, continued his questions, his pen scratching furiously. Miss Marple, however, turned her attention to the bakery itself. The display case, usually brimming with pastries, was nearly empty, save for a few scones and a tray of untouched almond tarts. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the counter. The shelves, the corners where shadows lingered. Near the cash register, half hidden by a stack of napkins, was a crumpled piece of paper. She bent down, as if adjusting her shoe, and slipped it into her sleeve with the deftness of long practice. Back at her cottage, she examined the paper by the light of her reading lamp. It was a fragment of a letter, the handwriting jagged and uneven. "Sell, or you'll regret it." The ink was smudged, but the threat was clear. Miss Marple's fingers traced the words, her mind conjuring the image of Eliza, defiant in the face of coercion. Who had written this? And why had Eliza kept it, only to discard it so carelessly? She thought of Sophie, who had mentioned, almost too casually, that Eliza had received odd letters lately. Sophie's deliveries took her to every corner of the village and beyond, to Upper Mead and even the outskirts of Much Benham did. She'll know more than she'll let on. And Grayson, with his meticulous ledgers and secretive air, had he seen the letters, or perhaps written them? Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to Clara, the quiet apprentice, who seemed to fade into the background yet was always present. Her hands dusted with flour, her eyes watchful. The village clock struck noon, its chimes carrying through the open window. Miss Marple folded the letter fragment and tucked it into her sewing basket, a habit born of years of discreet investigation. The bakery, she knew, was the heart of this mystery, its staff and patrons, a cast of characters in a drama yet to unfold. Eliza's death was no accident, nor a simple act of greed. There was a pattern here, a design as intricate as the lace she knitted, and she would find it. She rose, her movements unhurried, and prepared to visit Mrs. Bantry at the manor house. Mrs. Bantry, with her penchant for gossip and her husband's connections, might know more about the outsiders Miss Weatherby had mentioned. As Miss Marple stepped into the misty afternoon, her shawl draped over her shoulders, she felt the weight of the mystery settle around her. The storm was gathering, and she would be there when it broke. Chapter 3. A recipe for suspicion. The mist of the previous day had lifted, leaving St. Mary Mead bathed in the pale gold of an autumn morning. The village seemed to hold its breath, as if wary of disturbing the delicate balance between grief and curiosity that Eliza Hawthorne's death had wrought. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat perched neatly atop her silver hair, walked with purpose toward the Moonlight Bakery. Her ostensible errand was to deliver a jar of her homemade damson jam to Clara, a gesture of neighborly kindness, but her true intent was to probe deeper into the currents swirling around the bakery's tragedy. The high street was stirring now, with villagers going about their morning tasks, though their glances lingered on the bakery's darkened windows. The sign above the door, its painted crescent moon, faded but proud, seemed to mock the somber mood within. Miss Marple pushed open the door, the bell jingling faintly, a sound that felt out of place in the wake of death. The interior was dim, the air heavy with the ghost of yesterday's baking. Clara was alone, polishing the counter with a rag, her movements slow and deliberate, as if each swipe could erase the memory of Eliza's collapse. "Good morning, Clara," Miss Marple said, her voice soft as a summer breeze. "I thought you might like some of my jam. It goes rather well with scones, I find." Clara looked up, her young face pale beneath a dusting of freckles. "Oh, Miss Marple, that's kind of you," she said, managing a faint smile. I don't know what we'll do without Mrs. Hawthorne. She was everything here." Miss Marple set the jar on the counter, her eyes gentle but searching. "It must be difficult for you, my dear. You were so close to her, weren't you? Always in the kitchen, learning her recipes." Clara nodded, her fingers tightening round the rag. "She taught me everything: how to knead dough, how to balance flavors. She was particular, but fair. I can't believe she's gone." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of quiet sympathy. "And that vial of almond extract, Clara, do you recall when you last saw it full? It's such a curious thing to be empty so suddenly." Clara's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. "I told the inspector it was full yesterday morning. I used a drop for the tarts, just as Mrs. Hawthorne showed me. I don't know how it got empty. Truly, I don't." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on Clara's trembling hands. The girl was honest, she thought, but frightened perhaps of what she knew or what she suspected. Clara's loyalty to Eliza was evident, but loyalty could blind as well as bind. Miss Marple made a mental note to speak with her again when the shock had settled and her guard might be lower. The bell jingled again, and Sophie entered, her coat a splash of scarlet against the bakery's muted tones. Her dark curls were swept back, her lips painted a bold red, but her eyes betrayed a restlessness that Miss Marple noted at once. "Morning, Clara," Sophie called, her voice bright but strained. "Inspector Crane wants me to go over my delivery list again, as if I haven't told him everything already." Miss Marple turned, her smile disarming. "Good morning, Sophie. It must be tiring, all these questions. You were out delivering until just before the incident, weren't you?" Sophie hesitated, her fingers adjusting the scarf at her throat. "That's right. I was in Upper Mead, dropping off a box of pastries for Mrs. Langley. Got back around 7:30, maybe a bit later." "And did you notice anything unusual when you returned?" Miss Marple asked, her tone as casual as if she were inquiring about the weather. Sophie's smile faltered. "Nothing, really. Mrs. Hawthorne was in the kitchen, Clara was tidying up, and Mr. Grayson was in his office, as usual. Then I heard the scream." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the details. Sophie's story aligned with Clara's, yet there was a practiced quality to her words, as if she had rehearsed them, and that mention of a delivery to Upper Mead. Miss Marple recalled the village gossip about a stranger seen there, a man in a dark coat who avoided the high street. Could Sophie's deliveries be more than they seemed? Before she could press further, Mr. Grayson emerged from the back office, his ledger tucked under his arm. His suit was immaculate, his tie knotted with precision, but his eyes were shadowed, as if sleep had eluded him. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice clipped. "I didn't expect to see you here again." "I couldn't stay away," she replied, her tone light. "The bakery was so dear to Eliza, and to the village. I thought I might lend a hand in my small way. Grayson's lips twitched, a gesture that might have been a smile or a grimace. Kind of you, but we're managing. The accounts are in order, and will reopen after the festival once the police are done. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to the ledger, its edges worn from constant handling. You must have worked closely with Eliza, she said. She relied on you, I imagine, to keep the bakery's finances sound. She did, Grayson said, his voice flat. Mrs. Hawthorne was a shrewd businesswoman. She knew the value of every penny. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to the discrepancies she had glimpsed in the bakery's books during a previous visit, when Eliza had shown her the ledgers in a moment of pride. Small sums, unaccounted for, tucked away under vague headings like miscellaneous expenses. Had Eliza noticed them too? And had Grayson, with his meticulous habits, been careless or cunning? As she prepared to leave, Miss Marple's eyes caught a glint of something beneath the display. A hairpin, small and silver, half hidden by a scattering of crumbs. She bent down, as if to adjust her scarf, and slipped it into her pocket. It was an ordinary thing, yet out of place in a bakery where Eliza's fastidiousness was legendary. Did it belong to Clara, Sophie, or someone else entirely? Back in her cottage, Miss Marple examined the hairpin by the light of her reading lamp. It was finely made, with a tiny floral engraving, not the sort of thing Clara, with her simple tastes, would wear. Sophie, perhaps, with her flair for glamour, or had it been dropped by a customer or someone less innocent? She tucked it into her sewing basket, beside the fragment of the threatening letter she had found the day before. Over tea with Mrs. Bantry that afternoon, Miss Marple learned more about the village's undercurrents. Mrs. Bantry, with her boundless energy and love of scandal, was a fount of information. There's talk of a developer, she said, her eyes gleaming. Some London man wanting to turn the bakery into a tea shop or some such nonsense. Eliza wouldn't hear of it, of course. She told me so herself at the Women's Institute meeting last month. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression placid. And did she mention anyone in particular? A name, perhaps? Mrs. Bantry frowned, her brow furrowing. She did say something about a Mr. V. odd name, I thought. Said he was persistent, kept sending letters and calling at odd hours. Eliza was furious, said she'd never sell, not for all the money in London. Miss Marple's fingers tightened around her teacup, the letter fragment with its jagged threat, and now this Mr. V. The pieces were beginning to align, though the pattern remained elusive. She thought of Sophie's deliveries to Upper Mead, of Grayson's guarded demeanour, of Clara's nervous hands. And Leonard, with his debts and his flimsy alibi, did he fit in this web? As she walked home through the lengthening shadows, Miss Marple felt the weight of the mystery deepen. The bakery was a stage, its players each hiding their own script. The hairpin, the letter, the empty vial, they were clues, but not yet answers. Eliza's death, she was certain, was no mere act of malice. It was calculated, deliberate, woven into the fabric of the village's secrets, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, would unravel it, thread by thread. Chapter 4. The nephew's Alabitha. Afternoon sun cast long shadows across St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of amber and gold. Yet the warmth did little to dispel the chill that lingered around the Moonlight Bakery. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat replaced by a sensible woolen scarf, made her way to the Red Lion, the village's sole public house, where Leonard Hawthorne was said to have spent the evening of his aunt's death. Her steps were unhurried, her demeanor that of a kindly aunt out for a stroll, but her mind was as sharp as ever, turning over the threads of the mystery that had begun to unravel. The Red Lion was a squat, timbered building, its windows steamed from the warmth within. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ale and wood smoke, the low hum of conversation punctuated by the clink of glasses. Leonard sat at a corner table, his shoulders hunched, a half-empty pint before him. His auburn hair, so like Eliza's, was dishevelled, and his eyes carried the weight of sleepless nights. Miss Marple approached, her smile gentle, her knitting bag slung over her arm, as if it were the most natural accessory for a pub visit. "Leonard, my dear," she said, settling into a chair opposite him. "I do hope you're managing, under the circumstances. It's such a dreadful shock about Eliza." Leonard looked up, his expression a mix of wariness and relief. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice rough. It's been awful. I can't believe she's gone. And now the police keep asking questions, as if I had anything to do with it." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes soft but piercing. "It must be terribly trying, Inspector. Crane mentioned you were here, at the Red Lion, when it happened. With Tommy Pierce, I believe." Leonard nodded, his fingers tightening around his glass. "That's right. We were playing cards, me and Tommy, with a couple of lads from Upper Mead. I didn't even know about Aunt Eliza until the next morning, when Clara came banging on my door." Miss Marple's lips curved into a sympathetic smile, but her mind was elsewhere, recalling the villagers' opinion of Tommy Pierce. A charming rogue, with a quick tongue and quicker hands, Tommy was known for bending the truth to suit his needs. She had seen him only days ago, loitering near the bakery, his eyes darting as if searching for something or someone, and Tommy can confirm this, can he? She asked, her tone as mild as her tea. "Of course," Leonard said, a touch too quickly. "He was with me all night. Ask him yourself, he's probably around somewhere." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers brushing the edge of her knitting bag. "I shall, perhaps. It's such a comfort to have a solid alibi, isn't it? Though I couldn't help but notice, when I saw you and Eliza yesterday near the village green. You seemed rather upset. Was it about the bakery, dear?" Leonard's face reddened, his hands fidgeting. "It was nothing serious," he muttered. "Just a disagreement. Aunt Eliza wanted to keep the bakery as it was, all tradition and tarts. I thought we could do more, expand, maybe sell to someone with bigger plans. There was an offer, you see, from a man in London, a lot of money." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. "A man in London? How interesting. Did Eliza mention his name?" Leonard hesitated, his gaze dropping to the table. "She called him Mr. V, I think. Said he was pushy, kept sending letters. She wouldn't budge, though. Said the bakery was hers, and she'd never let it go." Miss Marple's mind seized on the name Mr. V, the same figure Mrs. Bantry had mentioned. The threatening letter fragment, with its jagged script, flashed in her memory. Was this mysterious developer the key to Eliza's death, or merely a piece of the puzzle? And Leonard, with his debts whispered about in the village, debts to card sharps and bookmakers, had he seen the offer as a way out? She noted the faint tremor in his hands, the way his eyes avoided hers, and the peculiar scent clinging to his coat, a bitter edge beneath the ale and tobacco. Almonds, perhaps, or something more sinister. "I see," she said, her voice soothing. "It must have been difficult, wanting the best for the bakery and for yourself. Eliza was so proud of her work, wasn't she?" Leonard nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. She was too proud, maybe. She didn't understand how hard it is keeping up with everything. The bills, the repairs. I just wanted to help. Miss Marple smiled, but her thoughts were racing. Leonard's story was plausible, yet it lacked the ring of truth. His alibi rested on Tommy Pierce, a man whose word was as stable as a house of cards. And that scent on his coat had he been in the bakery's kitchen, despite his claims. She recalled the empty vial of almond extract, its label a lie hiding a deadly truth. Had Leonard handled it, or was he merely a convenient scapegoat? As she rose to leave, Miss Marple's eyes caught a detail, a smudge of flour on Leonard's sleeve, faint but unmistakable. It was an odd thing for a man who claimed to have been at the pub all evening, far from the bakery's flour-dusted counters. She filed it away, her mind a ledger of such small, telling details. Outside, the village was settling into its afternoon rhythm, the high street dotted with shoppers and delivery carts. Miss Marple paused near the bakery, her gaze lingering on its shuttered windows. She thought of the hairpin she had found, its floral engraving a silent clue. Did it belong to Sophie, with her flair for style, or to someone else who had passed through the bakery unnoticed? And the letter fragment, with its threat to sell, had Leonard seen it, or perhaps written it in a moment of desperation? She decided to visit Tommy Pierce next, to test the strength of Leonard's alibi. Tommy was often found at the village green, where he and his cronies played cards or swapped stories. As she walked, her scarf fluttering in the breeze, Miss Marple's mind turned over the possibilities. Leonard's debts, his argument with Eliza, his connection to Tommy, they formed a pattern, but not a complete one. The bakery was a nexus of motives, and she suspected others had their own reasons to wish Eliza gone at the green. Tommy was indeed there, leaning against a tree, his cap tilted at a rakish angle. His smile was easy, but his eyes were sharp, assessing Miss Marple as she approached. "Afternoon, Miss Marple," he said, tipping his cap. "Heard about the bakery. Terrible business." "Indeed," she said, her tone mild. "Leonard tells me you were with him at the Red Lion last night. Such a comfort for him to have a friend confirm his whereabouts." Tommy's smile didn't waver, but his eyes flickered. "Oh, we were there, playing cards till late. Never left the pub." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest. "How fortunate. And you saw nothing of the bakery that evening? No one coming or going?" "Not a thing," Tommy said, too quickly. "I was nowhere near it." Miss Marple's lips twitched. Tommy's denial was as telling as his haste. She thanked him and turned away, her mind already weaving the threads together. Leonard's alibi was shaky, Tommy's word unreliable, and the scent of almonds on Leonard's coat was a clue she could not ignore. The bakery, she knew, held more secrets, and she would uncover them, one careful step at a time. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting needles resuming their steady rhythm. The mystery was deepening, the players revealing themselves in glances and half-truths. Leonard, Tommy, Sophie, Grayson, Clara had a role, and the stage was set for a revelation. She thought of a long-ago case in St. Mary Mead, where a young man's lies had unraveled under the weight of small inconsistencies. People, she mused, were predictable in their deceptions, and she would be there to catch them when they stumbled. Chapter 5. The accountant's secret. The late afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished floorboards. She sat in her armchair, a cup of Earl Grey cooling on the table beside her, her knitting needles paused mid-stitch as she considered the tangled web of the Moonlight Bakery mystery. The village of St. Mary Mead, with its orderly gardens and quiet lanes, seemed to hum with an undercurrent of unease, as if the very stones sensed the secrets buried within the bakery's walls. Miss Marple's mind, sharp as the scissors in her sewing basket, turned to Mr. Grayson, the bakery's accountant, whose guarded demeanor and meticulous habits had piqued her curiosity. Mr. Grayson was a man of precision, his ledgers a testament to a mind that thrived on order. Yet Miss Marple, with her knack for noticing the unspoken, had detected a shadow beneath his polished exterior, flicker of unease when Eliza's name was mentioned, a hesitation in his otherwise steady hands. The discrepancies she had glimpsed in the bakery's accounts, small sums vanishing under vague headings, suggested more than mere carelessness. Had Eliza discovered something amiss, and if so, had it cost her her life? Miss Marple decided to visit Grayson at his small office in the village, a converted cottage tucked behind the post office. She slipped on her coat, her scarf knotted neatly, and set out, her steps as deliberate as her thoughts. The village was settling into its evening routine, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. As she passed the Moonlight Bakery, its windows still dark, she noted a figure lingering near the Aaliyah man in a dark coat, his face obscured by a hat. He moved quickly out of sight, but Miss Marple's eyes followed him, her mind filing away the detail for later scrutiny. Office was a study in austerity, a desk, a filing cabinet, a single chair for visitors. The man himself was bent over his ledger, his spectacles perched on his nose, his pen moving with the precision of a metronome. He looked up as Miss Marple entered, his expression one of polite surprise, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of wariness. "Miss Marple," he said, setting down his pen. "This is unexpected. To what do I owe the visit?" "I was passing by," she said, her voice as soft as the wool in her knitting bag, "and thought I might inquire about the bakery's future. Eliza relied on you so, and it must be a heavy burden, managing things now." Grayson's lips tightened, a faint crease forming between his brows. "It is," he said. "Mrs. Hawthorne was particular about the accounts. I'm doing my best to keep things in order until a decision is made about the bakery." Miss Marple nodded, settling into the chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was a remarkable woman, wasn't she? So careful with her business. I recall her showing me the ledgers once, so proud of how well the bakery was doing, though I did notice some curious entries. Small amounts, labeled supplies, or miscellaneous. Nothing serious, I'm sure, but one does wonder. Grayson's hand twitched, his pen rolling slightly on the desk. "The bakery has many expenses," he said, his voice clipped. "Ingredients, repairs, delivery costs. It's all accounted for." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "You're so thorough, Mr. Grayson. Though I imagine Eliza, being so shrewd, must have kept a close eye on things. Did she ever question those entries?" Grayson's eyes flicked to the ledger, then back to her. "She trusted me," he said, a touch too firmly. "We discussed the accounts regularly. There were no issues." Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her mind was racing. Grayson's defensiveness was a thread she could tug, but carefully. She changed tack, her voice light. "It must have been a comfort, working so closely with her. I understand you knew her for many years, even before the bakery." Grayson's face softened. a shadow of something regret, perhaps crossing his features. "We were friends once," he said. "Long ago, before she married Mr. Hawthorne. She was always ambitious, even then." Miss Marple nodded, her memory stirring. Village gossip, often dismissed as idle chatter, had whispered of a young Grayson smitten with Eliza, his hopes dashed when she chose another. Such wounds, she knew, could fester, turning love to resentment over decades. Had Grayson's loyalty to the bakery masked a deeper motive? And those missing sums, were they a mistake, or a deliberate siphoning, perhaps to fund a personal venture? She rose, smoothing her skirt. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Grayson. I shan't take up more of your time. The village is grateful for your efforts, I'm sure." Grayson stood, his politeness a shield. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I'll do my best to keep things running smoothly." As she stepped outside, Miss Marple paused, her eyes scanning the street. The man in the dark coat was gone, but his presence lingered in her thoughts. She recalled Mrs. Bantry's mention of Mr. V, the London developer, and the threatening letter fragment she had found. Were Grayson's discrepancies tied to this outsider, or was there another layer to the mystery? Her next stop was the vicarage, where Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, was hosting a small gathering for the Women's Institute. Miss Marple, a regular attendee, knew it was a fertile ground for gossip, and she hoped to glean more about Grayson's past and the bakery's troubles. The vicarage was warm and bustling, the table laden with scones and tea. Mrs. Bantry, ever the center of attention, was recounting Eliza's refusal to sell the bakery, her voice carrying over the chatter. She was adamant, Mrs. Bantry said, her eyes wide. "Told me this, Mr. V sent her letters, even came to the village once, all charm and promises. But Eliza wouldn't budge. Said the bakery was her legacy, not some Londoner's plaything." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression one of polite interest. "And did she mention anything about her staff? Mr. Grayson, perhaps, or young Leonard?" Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her voice lowering. "She did say Grayson was acting odd lately, secretive, she called it. Kept locking himself in his office, muttering about expenses. And Leonard, well, she worried about him, with his debts and all. Thought he might be mixed up with the wrong sort." Miss Marple's mind seized on this. Grayson's secrecy, Leonard's debts, the mysterious Mr. V. The threads were tightening, though the pattern was still unclear. She thought of the hairpin, the letter fragment, the empty vial of almond extract. And now, Grayson's possible resentment, a wound from years past. Had he sabotaged the bakery's finances, hoping to force Eliza's hand? Or was he merely a pawn in a larger scheme? As she walked home, the village settling into twilight, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Sophie. The delivery girl's charm and evasiveness suggested she knew more than she let on. Her deliveries to Upper Mead, where the stranger had been seen, were a piece of the puzzle that did not yet fit. Miss Marple resolved to speak with her next, to test the strength of her story. In her cottage, by the glow of her reading lamp, Miss Marple took out her knitting and the hairpin from her sewing basket. She examined it again, its floral engraving catching the light. It was a small thing, but in St. Mary Mead, small things often led to great truths. She thought of a case years ago where a misplaced brooch had revealed a thief's identity. People, she mused, left traces of themselves, like crumbs on a counter, and she would follow them. The bakery's secrets were deepening, the players revealing their flaws. Grayson, with his hidden past and questionable accounts. Leonard, with his debts and shaky alibi. Sophie, with her guarded smiles, and Clara, with her quiet watchfulness. Somewhere among them, or beyond them, was the hand that had placed the cyanide. Miss Marple's needles clicked, each stitch a step closer to the truth, as the village slept under a starless sky. Chapter 6. The Delivery Girls. Charm. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a tentative glow over St. Mary Mead, as if the village itself were reluctant to face another day shadowed by murder. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her breakfast table with a pot of tea and a single boiled egg, gazed out at the Duchist garden, her thoughts as orderly as the rose bushes she tended. Her knitting lay folded beside her, a quiet companion to her reflections on the Moonlight Bakery and the secrets it held. The previous day's conversation with Mr. Grayson had left her with more questions than answers, his guarded manner and the ledger's discrepancies pointing to a motive yet to be uncovered. But today, her focus turned to Sophie, the bakery's delivery girl, whose bright smile and evasive answers suggested a role more complex than mere courier. Sophie was a striking figure in the village, her dark curls and scarlet lipstick a splash of glamour against the muted tones of St. Mary Mead. She moved through the lanes with the confidence of youth, her bicycle a familiar sight as she delivered pastries to homes and businesses. Yet Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing beneath the surface, had noted a hardness in Sophie's eyes, a calculation that belied her easy charm. Her deliveries to Upper Mead, where a mysterious stranger had been spotted, and her quick dismissal of anything unusual on the night of Eliza's death, were threads Miss Marple intended to tug, dressed in a tweed skirt and a lavender cardigan. Miss Marple set out for the village post office, where Sophie often stopped to collect parcels or exchange gossip with Miss Weatherby. The high street was waking, with shopkeepers sweeping their doorsteps and children darting toward the schoolhouse. The Moonlight Bakery remained closed, its windows like eyes shut against the world, but Miss Marple's gaze lingered there, picturing the kitchen where the fatal tart had been prepared, the empty vial of almond extract, the threatening letter fragment, the silver hairpin. They were pieces of a puzzle, and Sophie, she suspected, held another dot at the post office. Miss Weatherby was sorting letters behind the counter, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Sophie stood nearby, leaning against the wall, a basket of undelivered parcels at her feet. She was laughing at something Miss Weatherby had said, but the laughter faded when she saw Miss Marple enter, her expression shifting to one of polite wariness. "Good morning, Sophie," Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. "I was hoping to catch you. I've been meaning to ask about those lovely pastries you delivered to Mrs. Bantry last week. She was so pleased." Sophie's smile returned, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Miss Marple. Just doing my job. Mrs. Hawthorne always made sure the deliveries were perfect." Miss Marple nodded, adjusting her scarf as she studied Sophie's posture, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers toyed with the handle of her basket. "You must see so much of the village," she said. "All those deliveries to Upper Mead and beyond. It's a wonder you keep track of everyone." Sophie shrugged, her curls bouncing. "It's not so hard. People like their routines. Mrs. Langley in Upper Mead, for instance, she always orders a dozen scones on Tuesdays." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Upper Mead, yes. I've heard there's been a stranger about there lately, a man in a dark coat. You wouldn't have seen him, I suppose, on your rounds." Sophie's hand stilled on the basket, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "A stranger? No, I don't think so. Just the usual folk. Upper Mead's quiet, mostly farmers and such. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of mild curiosity. Of course. Though I did wonder, with Eliza receiving those odd letters Mrs. Bantry mentioned, then whether you might have noticed anything unusual. A letter dropped in the wrong place, perhaps, or someone asking after the bakery. Sophie's eyes flicked to Miss Weatherby, who was now engrossed in her sorting, then back to Miss Marple. Letters. Oh, I did see one once, in the bakery's waste-bin, all crumpled, like Mrs. Hawthorne didn't want it. I didn't read it. Mind, you just tossed it out with the rest. Miss Marple's lips curved into a gentle smile, but her mind was racing. Sophie's casual mention of the letter matched the fragment she had found, with its jagged threat to sell. Was Sophie truly as indifferent as she seemed, or had she read more than she admitted? And her deliveries to Upper Mead, could they connect to the mysterious Mr. V, the developer who had pressured Eliza? Before she could press further, the post. Office door swung open, and Tommy Pierce sauntered in, his cap tilted at its usual rakish angle. His eyes lit up at the sight of Sophie, and he gave her a wink that was more conspiratorial than flirtatious. "Morning, Sophie," he said, his voice loud enough to draw Miss Weatherby's frown. "Got any parcels for me?" Sophie's smile tightened, and she handed him a small package from her basket. "Just this, Tommy. Don't lose it." Miss Marple watched the exchange, her eyes sharp. There was a familiarity between them, a silent understanding that went beyond casual acquaintance. She recalled seeing Sophie slip a note to Tommy in the village square the previous day, a gesture too quick to be innocent. Were they allies in some scheme, or was Sophie merely caught in Tommy's orbit, as so many were? As Tommy left, whistling, Miss Marple turned back to Sophie. "You're so efficient, my dear," she said. It must be a comfort to Eliza, knowing her deliveries were in such capable hands. "Did you ever deliver anything for this Mr. V, the man who wrote to her?" Sophie's face remained composed, but her fingers tightened on the basket. "No, not that I recall. Mrs. Hawthorne handled her own correspondence, mostly. I just took the pastries where she told me." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away Sophie's evasion. She thanked her and left the post office, her steps slow. As she considered the encounter, Sophie's charm was a shield, but it was not impenetrable. Her connection to Tommy, her deliveries to Upper Mead, her knowledge of the letter, they were threads that wove into the larger tapestry of the mystery. The afternoon, Miss Marple visited the village library, a quiet haven where she often found clarity among the dusty tomes. She requested the local gazette, scanning its pages for any mention of developers or property deals in St. Mary Mead. A small article caught her eye. A London firm, Vantage Properties, had been inquiring about rural businesses seeking to convert them into modern establishments. The name Vantage struck a chord. Could Mr. V be linked to this firm? She made a note to ask Mrs. Bantry, whose husband had connections in the county. For more details, back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting needles clicking softly. She took out the hairpin and the letter fragment from her sewing basket, laying them on the table beside her teacup. The hairpin's floral engraving glinted in the firelight, a small but stubborn clue. Sophie's glamour made her the likely owner, but Miss Marple knew better than to assume. The letter fragment, with its threat to sell, pointed to a larger scheme, one that might involve Grayson's discrepancies, Leonard's debts, and Sophie's mysterious deliveries. She thought of a case from years past, when a village girl's flirtations had masked a theft, her charm a distraction from her guilt. Sophie, she suspected, was no thief, but her role was not innocent. The bakery's secrets were layered, like the pastry dough Eliza had kneaded so expertly, and Miss Marple would peel them back, one by one. As the fire crackled, she resolved to watch Sophie closely, to follow the trail of her deliveries, and to uncover the truth hidden behind her smile. Chapter 7. A twist in the tale of the Harvest Festival was a day away, and St. Mary Mead buzzed with a restless energy, its usual tranquility strained by the shadow of Eliza Hawthorne's death. The village green was a flurry of activity, with stalls being erected and bunting strung between lampposts. Yet the Moonlight Bakery remained closed, its silence a stark contrast to the festive preparations. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in her woolen shawl against the morning chill, sat on a bench overlooking the green, her knitting bag at her side, her eyes, bright and unyielding behind her spectacles, followed the villagers' movements. But her mind was fixed on the bakery and the threads of the mystery she had begun to unravel. The past days had revealed much: Leonard's shaky alibi, Grayson's questionable accounts, Sophie's guarded charm, and Clara's quiet fear. The letter fragment, the hairpin, the empty vial of almond extract, each was a clue, pointing to a calculated act rather than a random tragedy. Yet Miss Marple sensed the puzzle was incomplete, its edges jagged with a truth she had not yet grasped. The mention of Mr. V, the London developer, and the threat to sell the bakery suggested a motive tied to profit. But the cyanide's presence hinted at something more personal, more venomous. Her thoughts were interrupted by Clara, who approached the bench, her apron dusted with flour despite the bakery's closure. The girl's face was pale, her eyes darting as if she feared being watched. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, I need to tell you something. It's about Mrs. Hawthorne, the night she died." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her expression one of gentle encouragement. "Of course, my dear, what is it?" Clara glanced over her shoulder, then leaned closer. "I didn't tell the inspector everything. I was afraid. That night, before it happened, I heard Mrs. Hawthorne arguing with someone in the back room. A man, not from the village. He had a London accent, sharp-like, and he was saying she'd regret not taking his offer. She shouted back, said she'd never sell, not to him or anyone." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. "A London accent, you say? Did you see him, Clara?" Clara shook her head, her hands twisting together. "No, I was in the kitchen, cleaning. The door was ajar, and I heard them through it. I didn't dare look. But his voice, it was cold, like he meant every word. I think he might have been that Mr. V she talked about." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Clara's revelation added weight to the theory of a developer's involvement, but it also raised new questions. Why had this man visited the bakery in person, risking exposure? And how had the cyanide found its way into Eliza's tart, if the argument had been mere words? She patted Clara's hand, her voice soothing. "You've done well to tell me, Clara. It's a great help. Did you hear anything else that night? Anything at all?" Clara hesitated, her eyes dropping to the ground. "There was a sound after the man left, like something being moved in the kitchen. I thought it was Mrs. Hawthorne, rearranging things. She was always fussing over her tools. But now I'm not sure." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "A sound in the kitchen. After the stranger's departure, could it have been the placement of the fatal vial, or the tampering of the tart?" She thanked Clara, urging her to stay safe and speak to no one else for now. As the girl hurried away, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the bakery's layout. The back room, where the argument took place, was adjacent to the kitchen, with only a thin door between them. Anyone could have slipped in unnoticed, while Clara was distracted, determined to test her suspicions. Miss Marple made her way to the bakery, where Inspector Crane was overseeing a final sweep of the premises. The inspector, his notebook ever present, greeted her with a mix of respect and exasperation. "Miss Marple, you're here again," he said, his tone half joking. "I suppose you've got another theory." "Only a wish to help, Inspector," she replied, her smile disarming. "Might I have a look at the back room? I understand Eliza kept her papers there, and I thought there might be something to shed light on her troubles." Crane sighed but waved her through, accustomed to her persistence. The back room was small, cluttered with files and recipe books, its single window overlooking the alley. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the desk, noting a stack of unopened letters. Their postmarks from London. One envelope, partially torn, bore the logo of Vantage Properties, the firm she had read about in the Gazette. She made a mental note to ask Mrs. Bantry's husband, Colonel Bantry, to inquire about the company's dealings. As she turned to leave, her foot brushed against something beneath the desk, a small, crumpled piece of cloth, stained with a faint, oily residue. She bent down, as if adjusting her shoe, and slipped it into her knitting bag. The cloth smelled faintly of almonds, not the sweet warmth of extract, but the sharp bite of something chemical. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Was this a rag used to handle the cyanide, discarded in haste? And if so, who had left it here? Back in the village, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Sophie's deliveries and her connection to Tommy Pierce. The note she had seen Sophie pass to Tommy in the square suggested a secret, perhaps tied to the stranger Clara had overheard. She decided to follow Sophie on her next delivery to see where her bicycle led. That afternoon, she positioned herself near the post office, her knitting in hand, her eyes sharp. When Sophie emerged, her basket laden with parcels, Miss Marple followed at a discreet distance, her steps silent on the cobblestones. Sophie's route took her to Upper Mead, where the lanes grew quieter, the cottages replaced by fields and scattered farmhouses. She stopped at a small gatehouse, its windows curtained, and knocked. A man answered, his face shadowed by a hat, his coat dark and well cut. Miss Marple, hidden behind a hedgerow, couldn't hear their words, but she saw Sophie hand him a parcel and receive something in return, a small envelope, quickly tucked into her coat. The man retreated inside, and Sophie cycled away, her expression tense. Miss Marple's mind raced. The man matched Clara's description of the stranger, and his presence in Upper Mead aligned with Sophie's deliveries. Was he Mr. V, or an agent of Vantage Properties? And what was in the envelope payment? Instructions, or something more sinister? She recalled the cloth, the hairpin, the letter fragmentage, a piece of the puzzle, pointing to a scheme that stretched beyond the bakery's walls. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the cloth and hairpin laid out beside her teacup. The cloth's almond scent was a chilling reminder of the cyanide, and she wondered if it had been used to clean a surface, perhaps the spoon that had carried the poison to Eliza's tart. The hairpin, with its floral engraving, still suggested Sophie, but Miss Marple knew better than to leap to conclusions. The stranger in Upper Mead was a new thread, one that tied Sophie to the broader mystery. She thought of a case from years ago, where a village doctor's assistant had been bribed to tamper with a prescription, her loyalty bought by a charming outsider. Sophie, she suspected, was no villain, but she might be a pawn, caught in a web of coercion. The festival loomed, and with it, the chance to draw the players together. Miss Marple resolved to set a trap, to spread a rumor that might flush out the truth. She would watch and listen, and let the guilty betray themselves, as they always did. Her needles clicked, a steady rhythm against the crackle of the fire. The bakery's secrets were unraveling, and Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, was ready to meet the twist that awaited. Chapter 8. The Hidden Ledger. The morning of the harvest festival dawned crisp and clear. The air in St. Mary Mead alive with the scent of apples and the hum of anticipation. Villagers bustled about the green, arranging stalls with jams, pies, and knitted goods, their chatter a brave attempt to mask the unease left by Eliza Hawthorne's death. The Moonlight Bakery, its shutters still closed, stood like a silent mourner amidst the festive preparations. Miss Jane Marple, clad in a sensible coat and her ever-present scarf, watched the scene from her garden gate, her knitting bag slung over her arm. Her mind, however, was far from the festival's cheer, fixed instead on the bakery and the clues that had begun to form a pattern. Clara's revelation about the stranger with the London accent, Sophie's secretive exchange in Upper Mead, and the oily cloth with its faint almond scent had deepened the mystery. The letter fragment, the hairpin, and Grayson's questionable accounts pointed to a scheme larger than a simple act of malice. Miss Marple suspected that Eliza's refusal to sell the bakery had sparked a deadly chain of events, but the presence suggested a personal vendetta, a poisoner who knew her habits well. The mention of Mr. V and Vantage Properties loomed large, and Miss Marple resolved to uncover more about the bakery's inner workings. With the vicar's permission, she arranged to visit the bakery that morning, ostensibly to collect a recipe book Eliza had promised to lend her for the Women's Institute. The vicar, a kindly man with a penchant for avoiding conflict, was happy to oblige, unaware of Miss Marple's true purpose. As she stepped into the bakery, the air was stale, the counters bare save for a few forgotten crumbs. Inspector Crane was absent, his constables having completed their sweep, leaving the place eerily quiet. Miss Marple moved to the back room, where Eliza had kept her papers, her eyes scanning for anything overlooked. The room was as she remembered, cluttered with files, recipe books, and a faint scent of flour. The desk held a stack of letters from Vantage Properties, their tone polite but insistent, urging Eliza to consider their offer. Miss Marple's fingers brushed over them, noting the dates several over the past month, each more pressing than the last, but it was beneath a pile of invoices that she found something new. A small, leather-bound notebook, its edges worn, tucked inside a recipe book titled Hawthorne's Secrets. The title was Eliza's playful nod to her culinary prowess, but the notebook was no collection of recipes. Miss Marple opened it, her heart quickening. The pages were filled with Eliza's neat handwriting, but instead of ingredients, they listed figures, dates, amounts, and cryptic notes. One entry read, G £50, misc, supplies, 3/10, suspicious. Another, Vantage offer, refused again, 5/10. Threats, a third, more chilling. Kitchen vial, not mine, 6/10. The date was the day before her death. Miss Marple's breath caught. Eliza had suspected foul play, had known the vial was tampered with. Had she confronted someone, or had her caution come too late? She slipped the notebook into her knitting bag, her movements swift but careful. The ledger confirmed her suspicions about Grayson's discrepancies. small sums siphoned off, perhaps, to appease a creditor or fund a scheme. But the mention of the vial was a revelation. Eliza had noticed it, had questioned its presence. Did she test the tart to prove her suspicions, only to fall victim to the poison? Or had someone ensured? She consumed it, knowing her habits. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by a faint creak from the kitchen. She froze, her ears straining. The bakery was supposed to be empty, yet the sound was unmistakably a footstep, cautious and deliberate. She moved silently to the door, peering through the crack. A shadow moved across the kitchen, too quick to identify, but she caught a glimpse of a dark sleeve and the glint of metal, a key, perhaps, or something more sinister. The figure slipped out the back door, leaving only the echo of their presence, her heart steady. Miss Marple stepped into the kitchen, her eyes scanning for signs of disturbance. The counters were untouched, but a drawer near the stove was slightly ajar, its lock scratched as if forced. Inside, she found a bundle of receipts, one dated the day of Eliza's death, for a delivery of special ingredients to an address in Upper Mead. The receipt bore Sophie's initials, a detail that tightened the knot in Miss Marple's mind. Sophie's deliveries, the stranger in Upper Mead, the envelope she had received, were they tied to this mysterious order? She left the bakery, the notebook and receipt safely in her bag, and made her way to the vicarage to consult Mrs. Clement. The vicar's wife, a former clerk with a knack for numbers, might decipher the notebook's coded entries. Over tea, Mrs. Clement pored over the pages, her brow furrowed. "These look like Eliza's private accounts," she said. "She was tracking Grayson's withdrawals. See here, she marked them as unverified. And this note about Vantaget suggests she was investigating their offer, perhaps suspecting a connection to someone inside the bakery." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts aligning. "And the vial," she said softly. She knew it didn't belong. Could Grayson have placed it, hoping to force her hand? Or was it someone else, using the developer as a distraction? Mrs. Clement's eyes widened. "You think Grayson was colluding with this Mr. V? But why kill her? Selling the bakery would have been easier alive." "Unless," Miss Marple said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Eliza's refusal wasn't just about pride. Perhaps she uncovered something about Grayson, or Vantage, or even Sophie that made her a threat." As she left the vicarage, Miss Marple's mind turned to the shadow in the kitchen. The scratched drawer, the receipt, the stranger in Upper Mead. They pointed to a conspiracy. But the cyanide's personal touch suggested a betrayer close to Eliza. She recalled a case from years past, where a trusted servant had poisoned a master's wine, driven by a hidden grudge. The bakery's staff, Clara, Sophie, Grayson, each had access, each had secrets. But the stranger and the figure in the kitchen hinted at an outsider's hand. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple laid out her clues: the letter fragment, the hairpin, the oily cloth, the notebook, and now the receipt. The notebook was the key, its entries a map of Eliza's suspicions. She resolved to confront Sophie about the Upper Mead delivery, to press Leonard on his debts, and to watch Grayson for any slip. The festival would bring the village together, a perfect stage for truths to surface. She would spread a rumor that Eliza had left a hidden will, one that named a new heir. The guilty, she knew, would react, their masks slipping under pressure. Her needles clicked as the fire burned low, each stitch a step toward revelation. The bakery secrets were buried deep, but Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, would unearth them, as she always did. Chapter 9. The trap is set. The harvest festival was in full swing, transforming the village green of St. Mary Mead into a tapestry of colour and sound. Stalls brimmed with jars of ruby-red jam, golden-crusted pies, and woven baskets, while children darted through the crowd, their laughter mingling with the strains of a fiddler's tune. Yet beneath the festive cheer, a current of unease rippled, the shadow of Eliza Hawthorne's death lingering like a cloud on the horizon. The Moonlight Bakery, its doors still locked, stood as a silent reminder of the tragedy, its absence keenly felt among the villagers' offerings. Miss Jane Marple, seated on a bench near the tea tent, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, observed the scene with her usual quiet intensity. Her knitting needles moved rhythmically, a cover for the sharp calculations of her mind. The hidden ledger, with its cryptic entries, had confirmed Eliza's suspicions of foul play. Grayson's discrepancies, the threatening letters from Vantage Properties, and the mysterious vial in the kitchen. The receipt for a delivery to Upper Mead, initialed by Sophie, and the oily cloth with its almond scent pointed to a conspiracy. But the stranger Clara had overheard argued for an outsider's involvement. Miss Marple knew the truth lay in the interplay of these clues, and she was ready to draw it out. Her plan was simple but bold, a rumour carefully seeded to unsettle the guilty. She had mentioned to Mrs. Bantry, whose tongue was as lively as the festival itself, that Eliza might have left a hidden will, one that named a new heir to the bakery. The rumour, she knew, would spread like wildfire through St. Mary Mead, reaching the ears of those with secrets to protect. The guilty would act, their movements betraying them, and Miss Marple would be watching. As the afternoon wore on, she sipped tea with Mrs. Clement, her eyes scanning the crowd. Leonard Hawthorne was at a cider stall, his face flushed, his conversation with a group of young men loud and forced. Sophie cycled through the green, her basket empty, her smile bright but strained. Grayson stood apart, near the church gate, his ledger nowhere in sight, his gaze darting nervously. Clara, helping at a women's institute stall, kept her head down, her hands busy with jars of chutney. Miss Marple's rumour took root quickly. By mid-afternoon, she overheard whispers of the hidden will among the stallholders, their eyes flickering toward Leonard with pity or suspicion. She noted his reaction, a tightening of his jaw, a quick glance toward the bakery. Had he expected to inherit, or feared another's claim? She made her way to the cider stall, her approach as unassuming as ever. "Leonard, dear," she said, her voice soft. "You must be finding the festival bittersweet without Eliza. I hear she might have left a will, perhaps naming someone else to carry on her legacy. Have you heard such talk?" Leonard's hand froze on his glass, his eyes narrowing. "A will? No, she never mentioned anything like that. The bakery's mind, she always said so. Who's spreading this nonsense?" "Oh, just village talk," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "You know how people love a story. I'm sure it's nothing." Leonard muttered something and turned away, his shoulders tense. Miss Marple's eyes followed him, noting his hurried steps toward the high street. The rumour had struck a nerve, as she had hoped. She turned her attention to Sophie, who was now chatting with a farmer near the pie stall. Miss Marple approached, her smile disarming. "Sophie, how lovely to see. You enjoying the festival?" she said. "I was just thinking of Eliza's tarts, such a shame they're not here this year. Did she ever mention a will to you? Perhaps something about the bakery's future?" Sophie's smile faltered, her fingers tightening on her bicycle's handlebars. "A will? No, Miss Marple, she didn't. She was always talking about keeping the bakery as it was, not passing it on." Why do you ask?" "Just something I overheard," Miss Marple said, her eyes gentle but probing. "You were so close to her, with all those deliveries. I thought she might have confided in you." Sophie shook her head, her curls bouncing. "Nothing like that. I just did my job." She excused herself, her departure swift, her glance toward the bakery fleeting but unmistakable. Miss Marple's trap was set, and the players were moving. As dusk fell, the festival lights twinkled, casting long shadows across the green. She slipped away, her steps leading her to the bakery, where she had arranged with Inspector Crane to keep watch. The inspector, though skeptical of her methods, had agreed to station a constable nearby. Sensing her instincts were rarely wrong, under the cover of twilight, Miss Marple positioned herself in the alley beside the bakery, hidden by a stack of crates. The air was cool, the scent of cider and wood smoke drifting from the green. Her patience was rewarded when a figure appeared, moving stealthily toward the bakery's back door. It was Sophie, her scarlet coat unmistakable, her hands fumbling with a key. She slipped inside, the door closing softly behind her. Miss Marple waited, her heart steady, her ears straining for any sound. Moments later, another figure emerged. From the shadows, Tommy Pierce, his cap pulled low, a knife glinting in his hand. He approached the door, his movements cautious, but before he could enter, a scuffle broke out inside. Sophie's voice, sharp with panic, echoed through the crack. "In the door, you said no one would get hurt." Miss Marple signaled the constable, who had been waiting nearby, and he moved swiftly, bursting into the bakery with two others. The scene inside was chaos. Sophie stood against the counter, her face pale, clutching a bundle of papers. Tommy, caught off guard, dropped the knife, his hands raised as the constables seized him. Inspector Crane, arriving moments later, took charge, his notebook already open. "Miss Marple, what's this?" he demanded, his voice a mix of frustration and awe. "A trap, Inspector," she said calmly. "I spread word of a hidden will, and it seems to have drawn out those with something to hide." Sophie, trembling, spoke first. "It was Tommy," she said, her voice breaking. "He made me do it, plant the vial in the kitchen. He said it was just to scare Mrs. Hawthorne, to make her sell. I didn't know it was cyanide, I swear." Tommy snarled, struggling against the constable's grip. "She's lying. It was Grayson's idea. He wanted the bakery sold. Said he'd cut me in. I just wrote the letters." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind sifting through their words. Sophie's confession, Tommy's accusation, they were pieces of the truth, but not the whole. Grayson's involvement was plausible, given the ledger's discrepancies, but the cyanide's use was too precise, too personal. She stepped forward, her voice soft but commanding. "And the stranger in Upper Mead, Sophie, the man you delivered to, was he part of this?" Sophie's eyes widened, her resolve crumbling. "He was from Vantage. He paid me to keep quiet, to pass messages. But I didn't know about the poison, Miss Marple, I swear." Crane scribbled furiously, his eyes darting between the culprits. Miss Marple, however, knew the puzzle was not complete. The cloth, the hairpin, Eliza's notebook, they pointed to a deeper truth, one that lay beyond Sophie's fear and Tommy's greed. She thought of a case long ago where a servant's betrayal had been orchestrated by a mastermind unseen. The festival's lights flickered outside, and Miss Marple knew the final act was near. Chapter 10. The London Connection. The aftermath of the Harvest Festival's dramatic confrontation left St. Mary Mead in a state of subdued shock. the village green's festive glow dimmed by the arrests at the Moonlight Bakery, Sophie's tearful confession, and Tommy Pierce's defiant accusations had cast a net over the mystery. But Miss Jane Marple, seated in her cottage with a fresh pot of tea, knew the threads were not yet fully woven. The fire crackled softly, its warmth a counterpoint to the chill of the secrets she was unraveling. Her knitting needles lay idle, her mind focused on the clues that had surfaced, the hidden ledger, the oily cloth, the hairpin, and now Sophie's admission of a connection to a man from Vantage Properties. Sophie, under Inspector Crane's questioning at the village hall, had revealed more, her words tumbling out in a mix of fear and relief. The man in Upper Mead, she claimed, was a representative of Vantage, a sharp-eyed Londoner who called himself Victor Slade. He had paid her to deliver parcels, small packages, always sealed, with no questions permitted. She swore she hadn't known about the cyanide, only that Tommy had pressured her to plant the vial in the kitchen, claiming it was a harmless scare to push Eliza into selling. Tommy, in turn, insisted Grayson had orchestrated the scheme, promising him a share of the profits if the bakery was sold. Miss Marple, invited by Crane to sit in on the interviews as a courtesy to her role in the trap, listened with her usual quiet intensity. Her eyes, bright behind her spectacles, missed nothing. Sophie's trembling hands, Tommy's furtive glances, the way each deflected blame while revealing just enough to incriminate the other. Yet the puzzle was incomplete. The cyanide's precision, Eliza's own note about the suspicious vial, and the personal nature of the poisoned tart suggested a motive deeper than a developer's greed. Why had Eliza eaten the tart, knowing the vial was suspect, and who had ensured the poison reached her? Determined to trace the London connection, Miss Marple visited Colonel Bantry at the manor house, hoping his county contacts might shed light on Vantage Properties and Victor Slade. The Colonel, a bluff man with a fondness for military precision, was poring over a map of the estate when she arrived. "Miss Marple," he said, rising with a smile, "Dolly tells me you're unraveling this bakery business. What's this about a Londoner now?" "I believe a man named Victor Slade, from Vantage Properties, may be involved," she said, her voice soft but clear. Eliza received letters from them, and Sophie mentioned delivering parcels to a man in Upper Mead. "I wondered if you might know of the firm, or if your contacts could inquire." Colonel Bantry frowned, stroking his moustache. "Vantage Properties, eh? I've heard the name. Shady lot, always sniffing about for rural businesses to snap up. I'll telephone my man in London, see what he can dig up." "Slade, you say? Sounds like a slippery sort." Miss Marple thanked him and left, her mind turning to Grayson. The accountant's role was murky. His ledger discrepancies and secretive manner suggested complicity. But Tommy's accusation painted him as the mastermind. She decided to confront him, to test his reaction to the arrests. Grayson's office was as austere as ever, its single window letting in a sliver of grey light. He looked up as she entered, his spectacles glinting, his face pale. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice tight. "I heard about Sophie and Tommy. It's shocking, indeed," she said, settling into the chair opposite him. "They've said some troubling things, Mr. Grayson. Tommy claims you were behind the scheme to force Eliza to sell, that you stood to gain from Vantage's offer. I'm sure it's nonsense, but I thought you should know." Grayson's hands clenched, his knuckles white. "That's absurd," he snapped. "I managed the accounts, nothing more. Eliza trusted me. I'd never betray her." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her gaze was piercing. "Of course. Though Eliza did note some odd withdrawals in her private ledger, small sums, unverified. She suspected something, didn't she? Grayson's face flushed, his composure cracking. Those were legitimate expenses. Supplies, repairs. She was paranoid, always checking the books. I told her it was all in order. Miss Marple nodded, her mind seizing on his defensiveness. And this Victor Slade, did you ever meet him? Eliza mentioned him in her notes. A persistent man. Grayson hesitated, his eyes darting to the desk. I heard of him. He wrote to her, yes. I advised her to consider the offer. It was generous. Could have saved the bakery from debt. But she wouldn't listen. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Grayson's admission tied him to Vantage, but his role was still unclear. Was he a conspirator, or a man caught in a web knot of his making? She thanked him and left, her thoughts returning to the kitchen, where the cyanide had been placed. Eliza's note about the vial suggested she had suspected tampering. Had she tested the tart to confirm it, or had someone tricked her into eating it? That evening, Colonel Bantry telephoned with news. Vantage Properties was indeed active in the county, and Victor Slade was known as a ruthless negotiator, often using intermediaries to pressure reluctant sellers. A contact in London had seen Slade in Upper Mead weeks ago, meeting with a local, possibly Tommy Pierce. Miss Marple's mind raced. Slade's presence, Sophie's deliveries, Tommy's threats, they formed a chain, but the cyanide's delivery was the missing link. She recalled the oily cloth, its almond sent a chilling echo of the poison. Had it been used to handle the vial, or to clean a utensil? And the hairpin, with its floral engraving, did it belong to Sophie, or to someone else who had access to the kitchen? Miss Marple decided to revisit the bakery to examine the scene. Once more, with Crane's permission, she entered the kitchen at dusk, the air heavy with the memory of flour and sugar. The drawer with the scratched lock caught her eye, and she opened it, finding a small, overlooked note in Eliza's hand. Check, spoon, kitchen, 6/10. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The spoon had Eliza suspected it was contaminated. She searched the kitchen, finding a silver spoon tucked behind a jar, its surface faintly discolored. It smelled of almonds, sharp and deadly. This, she realized, was the true instrument of death, not the tart itself. Eliza, cautious but curious, had likely used the spoon to taste her creation, unaware it had been tainted. The puzzle was clarifying, but the mastermind remained elusive. Slade's pressure, Tommy's threats, Sophie's deliveries, accounts they were pieces, but who had wielded the poison? Miss Marple thought of a case years ago where a trusted friend had betrayed a confidant, their motive hidden in plain sight. She resolved to press Sophie further, to uncover the full extent of Slade's influence, and to watch Grayson for any slip. The truth, she knew, was close, waiting to be coaxed from the shadows. Chapter 11. The final ingredient. The twilight air in St. Mary Mead carried a faint chill, as if the village itself sensed the unraveling of its secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat by her cottage window, the glow of her reading lamp casting soft shadows. Across the room, her knitting lay untouched, her mind wholly occupied with the Moonlight Bakery and the clues that had brought her to the cusp of truth. The hidden ledger, the oily cloth, the silver hairpin, the discolored spoon, and Sophie's confession had woven a tapestry of deceit. But the final thread, the true hand behind Eliza Hawthorne's death, remained just out of reach. The discovery of the tainted spoon, with its telltale almond scent, had shifted the puzzle's shape, suggesting a murder both calculated and intimate, designed to exploit Eliza's own vigilance. Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the ledger's chilling note. Check spoon, kitchen, says Decimus Elisa. Had suspected tampering, had perhaps intended to confront the culprit, yet she had eaten the tart, or at least tasted it, using the contaminated spoon. Had she been testing her suspicions, or had someone ensured the poison reached her lips? The involvement of Victor Slade, the Vantage Properties agent, pointed to a broader scheme, but the cyanide's precision suggested a betrayer within the bakery's inner circle, someone who knew Elisa's habits, her kitchen, her trust, determined to piece together the final elements. Miss Marple revisited the bakery at dawn, when the village was still cloaked in mist. Inspector Crane, though weary of her persistence, had granted her access, his respect, for her instincts outweighing his frustration. The kitchen was as she had left it, its counters gleaming in the half-light, the air heavy with the memory of Eliza's craft. Miss Marple stood by the stove, her eyes tracing the path from the drawer to the counter where the tart had been found. The spoon, now in Crane's possession as evidence, had been tucked behind a jar, a place only someone familiar with the kitchen would choose. She opened Eliza's recipe book, its pages worn from years of use, and found a folded note tucked inside. Missed in her earlier search, it was in Eliza's hand, dated the day of her death. Test tartamond, substitute, safe batch. Miss Marple's breath caught. Eliza had been cautious, using a substitute for the almond extract she suspected was tainted. The tart itself was not poisoned. The cyanide had been on the spoon, a trap set for a woman who tasted her creations before serving them. The killer had known her habits intimately, had counted on her curiosity to seal her fate. Miss Marple's mind raced, piecing together the sequence. The stranger in Upper Mid-Victor, Slade had pressured Eliza through letters and visits, likely orchestrating the threatening notes with Tommy Pierce's help. Sophie, coerced by Tommy, had planted the vial to scare Eliza, unaware it contained cyanide. Grayson's siphoned funds suggested he was complicit, perhaps hoping to profit from a sale. But the spoon's tampering pointed to someone closer, someone who could move freely in the kitchen without arousing suspicion. She thought of Clara, the quiet apprentice, always present, her hands dusted with flour, her eyes watchful. Clara had overheard the argument with Slade, had seen the vial, had access to the kitchen. Yet her fear seemed genuine, her loyalty to Eliza unshakable. Could she have been manipulated, or was her timidity a mask? Miss Marple recalled the hairpin, its floral engraving a clue that still eluded her. It didn't suit Clara's plain style, nor Sophie's bold glamour. Had it fallen from another's hair, someone unnoticed in the chaos? To test her theory, Miss Marple visited Clara at her small cottage on the edge of the village. The girl was kneading dough on her kitchen table, a habit born of nervous energy. "Miss Marple," she said, startled, wiping her hands on her apron. "I didn't expect you." "I won't keep you, dear," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. "I was thinking of Eliza's recipes, how careful she was. Did she ever mention testing a tart that day, perhaps with a substitute ingredient?" Clara's eyes widened, her hands trembling. She did say something about a new batch, one she made herself, said it was safe, that she'd used her own extract. "I thought she meant for the festival." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze soft but piercing. "And the spoon she used, do you recall seeing it?" "It was found behind a jar, a bit discolored." Clara's face paled. I saw her with it, yes." She kept it special, for tasting. I didn't touch it, Miss Marple, I swear. Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind noting Clara's fear. The girl was telling the truth, but her nervousness suggested she knew. More perhaps, something she didn't realize was significant. As she left, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the hairpin. She visited Mrs. Bantry, whose eye for fashion might identify its owner. Showing her the pin, she asked, "Have you seen anything like this, Dolly? It's quite distinctive." Mrs. Bantry examined it, her brow furrowing. "It's not Sophie. She prefers gaudy things. Nor Clara's, too plain for her, but I've seen one like it. At the Women's Institute, perhaps. Mrs. Langley from Upper Mead wore something similar last month." Miss Marple's heart quickened. Mrs. Langley, Sophie's regular customer. In Upper Mead, where Slade had been spotted. Could she be involved? A silent partner in the scheme. Mrs. Langley was a widow, reserved but well-connected. Her home a hub for visitors from the city. Miss Marple recalled a faint rumor of her financial troubles, whispered at the post office. Had she been drawn into Slade's orbit, perhaps leaving the hairpin during a visit to the bakery? She returned to the bakery, her steps purposeful, and examined the kitchen once more. Near the stove, tucked in a corner, was a small ledger she hadn't noticed before. Delivery log, with entries in Sophie's hand. One caught her eye. Mrs. Langley, Upper Mead, special order, 6/10. The date matched Eliza's death, and the order was for a single tart, delivered by Sophie. Miss Marple's mind clicked into place. Mrs. Langley, or someone in her household, had ordered the tart, knowing Eliza would taste it. The spoon, tampered with by Tommy under Slade's orders, had been the true weapon, placed where Eliza would use it. The twist was cruel. Eliza's own caution had led to her death, her suspicion of the vial prompting her to test a safe tart, unaware the poison lay elsewhere. Slade had orchestrated the pressure, Tommy the threats, Sophie the delivery, and Grayson the financial strain. But the spoon's taint pointed to a local hand, Mrs. Langley. Perhaps, or someone she sheltered. Miss Marple shared her findings with Inspector Crane, urging him to question Mrs. Langley. The inspector, though skeptical, agreed to investigate, his trust in her instincts now firm. As she sat by her fire that evening, the hairpin and ledger beside her, Miss Marple felt the weight of the tragedy. Eliza, betrayed by those she trusted, had died for her refusal to yield. The truth was near, and Miss Marple, with her quiet resolve, would see it through. Chapter 12. The village restored. The first frost of the season dusted St. Mary Mead, cloaking the village in a delicate sheen that sparkled under the morning sun. The frenzy of the harvest festival had faded, leaving behind a quiet resolve among the villagers to reclaim their routines, though the memory of Eliza Hawthorne's death lingered like a stubborn fog. The Moonlight Bakery, its windows still dark, stood as a monument to the tragedy. But Miss Jane Marple, seated at her breakfast table with a pot of tea, sensed the mystery was nearing its close. Her knitting needles clicked softly, a counterpoint to her thoughts, which wove together the final threads of the case. The discovery of the tainted spoon and Eliza's note about the safe batch had revealed the chilling precision of her murder. Victor Slade, the Vantage Properties agent, had orchestrated a campaign of pressure, using Tommy Pierce to write threatening letters and Sophie to deliver suspicious parcels. Grayson's siphoned funds had weakened the bakery's finances, making it ripe for takeover. But the hairpin, with its floral engraving, and the delivery log pointing to Mrs. Langley in Upper Mead, had introduced a new player, one whose role Miss Marple suspected was pivotal. The spoon, laced with cyanide, had been the true instrument of death, exploiting Eliza's habit of tasting her creations. Inspector Crane, acting on Miss Marple's urging, had visited Mrs. Langley's gatehouse in Upper Mead. The widow, a reserved woman with sharp features and a penchant for privacy, had been evasive, claiming no knowledge of Slade or the bakery's troubles. Yet Crane found a hairpin matching the one from the bakery, tucked in a drawer alongside a letter from Vantage Properties, offering her a substantial sum to act as an intermediary. Mrs. Langley, it seemed, had been drawn into the scheme by financial desperation, her late husband's debts, a burden she could not shake. She admitted to hosting Slade, passing his instructions to Tommy, but denied any role in the poisoning. Miss Marple, invited to the village hall to hear Mrs. Langley's statement, listened with her usual quiet intensity. The widow's story was plausible, but her nervousness, her hands twisting a handkerchief, her eyes avoiding Crane's, suggested she knew more. Miss Marple's mind returned to the spoon, hidden behind a jar, a place only someone familiar with the kitchen could choose. Mrs. Langley had visited the bakery often, delivering preserves for Eliza's tarts, her presence unremarkable. Had she, or someone in her household, tampered with the spoon, knowing Eliza's habits? To test this, Miss Marple suggested Crane search the gatehouse for traces of cyanide. The inspector, now fully reliant on her instincts, complied, and his constables found a small vial in the garden shed, its label scraped off, but its contents matching the poison's chemical signature. Mrs. Langley, confronted with the evidence, broke down, admitting she had been coerced by Slade, who threatened to expose her debts. She had passed the vial to Tommy, believing it was a harmless scare, but claimed ignorance of the spoon's tampering. The final piece fell into place when Crane interrogated Tommy again. Under pressure, he confessed to placing the cyanide on the spoon, acting on Slade's orders to make it quick. He had slipped into the kitchen during Clara's distraction, using the oily cloth to handle the poison, then discarded it in haste. Sophie, he insisted, was unaware of the true nature, her role limited to planting the decoy vial. Grayson, meanwhile, admitted to skimming funds to pay off personal debts, but swore he had no part in the murder. His collusion with Slade limited to financial pressure. Miss Marple, piecing together their confessions, saw the tragic design: Slade's ambition, Tommy's greed, Sophie's coercion, Grayson's weakness, and Mrs. Langley's desperation had converged, each playing a part in Eliza's death. The hairpin, likely dropped by Mrs. Langley during a visit, had been a silent witness, its floral engraving a clue to her presence. Eliza, suspecting foul play, had tested a safe tart but used the tainted spoon, her caution turned against her by a killer who knew her well. With the evidence in hand, Crane arrested Tommy for murder, Mrs. Langley for conspiracy, and Grayson for embezzlement. Sophie, her role coerced, was granted leniency, though she chose to leave St. Mary Mead, her charm dimmed by shame. Victor Slade, traced to a London hotel, was apprehended by county authorities, his scheme unravelled by the villagers. Quiet observer, Miss Marple, back in her cottage, sat by the fire, her knitting resumed. The bakery was set to reopen under Leonard's care. The young man cleared of suspicion and determined to honour his aunt's legacy. Clara, now head baker, was crafting a new almond tart, free of any bitter taint. The village, shaken but resilient, began to heal, its rhythms restored. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to a case, years ago, where a village feud had ended in poison. the culprit undone by a single overlooked detail. People, she mused, were predictable in their flaws, their secrets as fragile as pastry. She sipped her tea, content to let St. Mary Mead hum along, knowing she would be there when the next mystery stirred. Chapter 13. Reflections by the fire. The frost that had kissed St. Mary Mead's lanes gave way to a gentle thaw, as if the village, relieved of its burden of secrets, exhaled at last. The Moonlight Bakery, though still shuttered, was poised to reopen, its ovens soon to glow again under Leonard Hawthorne's tentative stewardship. The arrests of Tommy Pierce, Mrs. Langley, and Mr. Grayson, along with the apprehension of Victor Slade in London, had quelled the village's unrest. Yet a quiet melancholy lingered, a tribute to Eliza Hawthorne's indomitable spirit. Miss Jane Marple, seated by her cottage fire, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm, felt the weight of the case settle into memory. Its pieces now aligned, but its lessons enduring. The evening was crisp, the air carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from neighboring chimneys. Miss Marple's parlour was a haven of order, the tea tray neatly arranged, the lace doilies pristine, the clues of the bakery mystery, the letter fragment, the hairpin, the oily cloth, the hidden ledger safely stored in her sewing basket. Their work done. Her mind, however, was far from idle, sifting through the human frailties that had woven the tragedy. Eliza's death, she mused, was a tapestry of greed, fear, and betrayal, each thread pulled by a different hand. Victor Slade's ambition had set the stage. His pressure on Eliza to sell the bakery a calculated move to expand his firm's reach. Tommy Pierce, with his reckless greed, had turned threats into murder, tainting the spoon with cyanide to hasten the outcome. Sophie, caught in a web of coercion, had played her part reluctantly, her deliveries a cover for Slade's schemes. Mrs. Langley, driven by financial desperation, had facilitated the plot, her hairpin a silent witness to her visits. And Grayson, with his siphoned funds, had weakened the bakery's defenses. His old resentment of Eliza's rejection perhaps, fueling his complicity. Yet the heart of the mystery lay in Eliza's own actions. Her note about the safe batch and the suspicious vial showed a woman aware of danger, testing her suspicions with a tart she believed harmless. The poisoned spoon, placed by Tommy in a moment of cunning, had turned her vigilance against her, a cruel irony that Miss Marple found particularly poignant. Eliza, so proud, so resolute, had been betrayed by those closest to her. Their knowledge of her habits, her habit of tasting each creation, her undoing. Miss Marple's needles paused as she thought of Clara, the quiet apprentice who had emerged unscathed but shaken. Clara's fear had been genuine, her loyalty to Eliza unshakable, yet her silence about the stranger's argument had delayed the truth. Miss Marple understood such reticence. Fear could bind tongues as tightly as guilt. She recalled a case from her youth, when a grocer's wife in St. Mary Mead had poisoned her husband's jam, driven by jealousy over a rival. The village had whispered then, as now, but it was a single, overlooked detailer smudged fingerprint on a jar that had unraveled the crime. People, she reflected, left traces of their hearts, whether in love or malice. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts drifting to the village's resilience. St. Mary Mead, with its cozy cottages and hidden currents, had weathered the storm, its gossip now turning to the bakery's reopening. And Clara's new tarts. Leonard, chastened by his new accusation, had vowed to honor his aunt's legacy, his debts a lesson learned. Sophie's departure, though sad, was a release. Her role in the scheme a mistake born of youth and fear. Mrs. Langley, facing trial, had retreated into silence, her gatehouse empty. Grayson, stripped of his position, awaited his fate. His meticulous ledgers, now evidence against him. Miss Marple's gaze settled on the sewing basket, where the hairpin lay, its floral engraving. A reminder of how small things could unlock great truths. She thought of Eliza, a woman whose strength had both defined her and drawn her enemies. The bakery, her legacy, would endure, but its warmth would forever carry a hint of loss. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, each stitch a testament. To her quiet vigilance, the village clock chimed, its notes soft through the window. St. Mary Mead was safe, its secrets laid bare, but Miss Marple knew other mysteries would come. Human nature, with its tangle of motives, was as constant as the seasons. She set her knitting aside, her mind already turning to the next whisper, the next clue that would stir her to action. For now, though she was content to sit by the fire, the village's guardian, unseen but ever watchful. Chapter 14. A new dawn winter's breath had fully settled over St. Mary Mead, dusting the village with a fine layer of snow that softened the edges of its thatched roofs and stone walls. The lanes, once heavy with the tension of Eliza Hawthorne's murder, now hummed with the quiet optimism of renewal. The Moonlight Bakery, after weeks of darkness, was poised to reopen, its windows aglow once more with the promise of warmth and sustenance. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in her thickest shawl, stood at her cottage gate, her eyes tracing the familiar paths of the village. Her knitting bag hung at her side, a silent companion to her thoughts, which lingered on the resolution of the bakeries, tragedy and the resilience of those left behind. The case had unraveled with the precision of one of her own lace patterns. Each clue, the letter fragment, the hairpin, the oily cloth, the hidden ledger, the tainted spoon, weaving a story of greed, coercion, and betrayal. Victor Slade's ambition, Tommy Pierce's reckless malice, Sophie's reluctant complicity, Mrs. Langley's desperation, and Grayson's quiet treachery had converged to end Eliza's life. Her own caution turned against her by a poisoned spoon, yet the village, like the seasons, had turned toward healing. Its spirit unbroken, the bakery's reopening was set for that morning. A modest event marked by the scent of fresh bread and the soft jingle of the bell above the door. Leonard Hawthorne, cleared of suspicion and chastened by his brush with ruin, had taken up the mantle of his aunt's legacy. Clara, now head baker, had crafted a new almond tart. Its recipe a tribute to Eliza, but free of the bitter shadow that had haunted the last. Miss Marple, invited as a guest of honor, made her way to the high street, her steps steady despite the slick cobblestones. The bakery was transformed, its counters gleaming, its shelves laden with golden loaves and delicate pastries. Clara moved, with a quiet confidence, her apron pristine, her hands steady as she arranged trays of scones. Leonard greeted villagers with a nervous smile, his auburn hair neatly combed, his eyes bright with determination. The crowd was small but warm, their chatter a blend of nostalgia for Eliza and hope for the future. Mrs. Bantry, ever the village's pulse, was there, her voice carrying tales of the festival and the arrests that had followed. "Miss Marple," she called, waving her over, "you've worked a miracle, haven't you? The bakery's alive again, and all because of you." Miss Marple's smile was modest, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "Oh, Dolly, I only listened and watched. The truth has a way of revealing itself, if one is patient." She accepted, A slice of Clara's almond tart, its flavor rich but untainted, a testament to the girl's skill. As she nibbled, her gaze swept the room, noting the absence of Sophie, whose departure had left a void, and the quiet presence of villagers who had once whispered of Leonard's guilt. Inspector Crane stood near the door, his notebook tucked away, his nod to Miss Marple one of grudging admiration. The village hall, where Tommy, Mrs. Langley, and Grayson awaited trial, was a distant thought. The law's wheels, turning beyond St. Mary Mead's borders, Miss Marple's mind drifted to the clues that had guided her. The jagged letter fragment, hinting at Slade's threats. The hairpin, tying Mrs. Langley to the scene. The oily cloth, used by Tommy to handle the cyanide. The ledger, exposing Grayson's betrayal. And the spoon, the silent killer that had exploited Eliza's trust. Each had been a whisper of truth, amplified by her quiet observation. She thought of a case long ago, when a misplaced glove had unmasked a poisoner in a neighboring village, the culprit undone by their own carelessness. Human nature, she mused, was a constant, its flaws as predictable as the snow now falling outside. Clara approached, offering a shy smile. "Miss Marple, I made this tart for you," she said, presenting a small box. "It's not much, but thank you for everything." Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch gentle but firm. "You've done Eliza proud, my dear. She'd be pleased to see the bakery in your care." As she left, the bell jingling softly, Miss Marple stepped into the snow-dusted street. The village was alive again, its heart beating in the bakery's warmth, its secrets laid bare. Leonard would stumble but learn, Clara would grow into her role, and St. Mary Mead would endure, its rhythms as steady as her knitting. She walked home, her shawl drawn tight, her mind already alert for the next whisper of trouble. For in a village, as in life, mysteries never truly ended. They only waited for the right moment to stir. The end.